In a world where reality is defined by what we can see, touch, and understand, the boundaries of existence are fragile, easily shattered by the human desire to explore beyond the known. But what if the very laws we trust to hold the universe together were nothing more than illusions? What if, instead of being the masters of our fate, we were nothing more than pawns in a cosmic game, subjects of an experiment far beyond our comprehension? This is the terrifying truth that a group of ambitious scientists is about to uncover when Dr. Evelyn Harper and her team of brilliant physicists stumbled upon the breakthrough of a lifetime, opening a portal to an infinite number of parallel universes. They thought they were on the cusp of rewriting the very nature of existence, but they weren't prepared for what they found on the other side. What was supposed to be a monumental discovery quickly became a nightmare as they encountered a hidden race of godlike beings who had been manipulating their world and countless others for their own amusement. Trapped in a multiverse that stretches far beyond their understanding, the team must confront a terrifying truth. Their lives, every decision, every victory, every loss, have been nothing more than simulations. And the architects of their existence? They are the gods of the parallel universes, creatures who test, shape, and destroy civilizations across infinite dimensions like pieces on a chessboard. As the team struggles to escape their cosmic prison, they realize that their every move has already been decided. Their rebellion may be their last act of free will, or perhaps just another test in the gods' cruel game. The question now is, can they outsmart the gods, or will they be doomed to repeat their fate forever? The hum of machinery filled the sterile, fluorescent-lit lab as Dr. Evelyn Harper stood at the forefront of the most ambitious project of her career. She had spent over a decade preparing for this moment, pouring every ounce of her intellect into unlocking the secrets of the multiverse. The team around her was equally eager, their faces a mixture of nervous anticipation and scientific zeal. "Are we ready?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm but carrying the weight of responsibility. Dr. Marcus Shaw, her closest collaborator and the team's lead physicist, nodded as he adjusted his glasses. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. The equation is solid. The calculations have been verified. This is it." The air seemed to thrum with energy, as if the entire lab was holding its breath. Evelyn could feel the pulse of the multiverse in her veins, a sensation she had come to associate with the final steps of every breakthrough. This time, however, it was different. There was something in the air, a crackling potential that felt almost alive. At the center of the room, a massive machine towered over them, its twisting metal coils and glass chambers housing the delicate circuitry that had taken years to perfect. It was an elaborate quantum portal designed to breach the boundaries between realities, to peer into the countless universes that stretched beyond their own. "We're not just looking for answers anymore," Evelyn said, her voice a mix of excitement and dread. "We're about to break through." With a final glance at the team, she pressed the button. The machine whirred to life, the hum of its engines growing louder as a vortex of swirling energy began to form in the center of the lab. It was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Vibrant, unstable, yet impossibly beautiful. For a moment, it felt as though the universe itself was folding in on itself, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. The portal flickered. Evelyn's heart raced as she watched the swirling mass of colors shift and bend, forming shapes that defied logic. They had opened a window, but what they saw on the other side wasn't a parallel Earth, as they had anticipated. No, it was far stranger. An eye. A vast, all-seeing eye stared back at them from the depths of the portal, its pupils contracting and expanding like the center of a cosmic storm. The scientists froze, their breath caught in their throats. The eye blinked, and for a fraction of a second, the entire lab seemed to tremble under its gaze. Evelyn felt a strange, unsettling chill creep up her spine. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's not supposed to be there," Marcus said, his words trailing off in disbelief. Suddenly the eye vanished, replaced by a swirling blackness. The portal began to destabilize, crackling and sparking with violent energy. A loud explosion reverberated through the lab as the walls shook. Evelyn's team scrambled, trying to shut down the system, but it was too late. The vortex expanded, swallowing everything in its path. It wasn't a tear between dimensions. It was an invitation. The machines malfunctioned, their delicate instruments shattered, and the world around them warped and twisted, pulling the scientists into an endless expanse of shifting realities. Evelyn found herself falling, floating through a vast, surreal space. No ground beneath her, no sky above, just an infinite, ever-shifting tapestry of worlds, some familiar, some alien, all stretching out into infinity. As she spun, helpless in the chaos, her mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The machine had done its job, but it had done far more than they had ever intended. When the swirling stopped, Evelyn and her team found themselves standing on the edge of an unfamiliar world. A world that was not their own, yet somehow felt eerily familiar. "What have we done?" Marcus gasped, his face pale as he surveyed the landscape. A barren wasteland of shattered ruins and towering, impossibly tall structures that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. But it was the sky that held their attention. In the distance, the clouds twisted and churned, forming shapes that resembled eyes. Watching them, judging them. Evelyn's heart sank as she realized the truth. They weren't just in another universe. They had stumbled upon something far worse. Something watching them and perhaps controlling everything they saw. Something far more ancient. "Look," Marcus pointed, his voice shaking. "There, in the sky. It's not just a storm. Those are beings. Godlike beings." And with that revelation, the true horror of their situation began to sink in. They weren't exploring other worlds. They were being observed, tested. They were already part of someone else's game. And the rules? They were about to find out how cruel those rules could be. The landscape before them was unlike anything Evelyn had ever imagined. It wasn't just alien. It was wrong in every possible way. The air shimmered with a strange, otherworldly energy, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, breathing. Marcus, who had always been the more cautious of the group, took a hesitant step forward, his eyes darting from one impossible structure to the next. This isn't a parallel universe," he murmured, barely above a whisper. "This is something else, something controlled." Evelyn felt the weight of his words settle over her like a crushing wave. She had known, deep down, that their discovery was too powerful, too dangerous, but this was beyond anything she could have prepared for. The world before them seemed to fold in on itself, bending and stretching in ways that defied every law of physics they had ever known. The horizon, if it could even be called that, was a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, constantly shifting and rearranging like a cracked mirror that refused to settle. "Where are we?" Dr. Lara Vance, the team's quantum specialist, asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "This isn't any world we've ever simulated. It's like the fabric of reality itself is changing." "We need to get our bearings," Evelyn said, forcing her voice to steady. "Let's find shelter and try to recalibrate the portal. We can't stay here for long." They moved cautiously, but with every step they took, the sense of unease grew heavier. The ground they walked on felt unstable, and strange, disembodied sounds echoed through the air, as though whispers were carried on the wind, voices that didn't belong to anyone in their group. As they ventured further, they began to notice something even more unsettling. Scattered among the ruins were signs of life, but not life in the way they understood it. Large, ethereal shapes drifted through the air, translucent and glowing, faintly with an inner light. They resembled no known animal, but their forms were too organic to be purely artificial. Some seemed to move with purpose, while others simply floated aimlessly, as though they were mere reflections of a world that no longer existed. And in the distance, the towering structures that stretched toward the sky had a strange, almost mechanical quality to them, as though they were not built but grown or shaped by some force beyond their comprehension. Evelyn glanced over at Marcus, whose face was pale and tense. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mix of awe and fear. "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her thoughts racing, "but we need to understand it, or we might never get back to our own universe." As they continued their exploration, they stumbled upon something that stopped them cold, an enormous, spherical object resting in the center of a vast plaza, surrounded by strange, glowing symbols etched into the stone. The sphere was unlike anything they had ever seen, its surface smooth and dark like obsidian, and its size impossible for the eye to measure. It seemed to hum, a low, resonant vibration that sent ripples through the air. Lara reached out cautiously, her hand hovering just above the surface. "What is this?" she whispered. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them trembled, and a deep, reverberating voice filled the air. It was not a voice they could hear with their ears, but one that seemed to vibrate through their very bones, resonating with the deepest parts of their minds. "Welcome, travelers," the voice boomed, echoing in their heads like the roar of a thunderstorm. "You have crossed the threshold. You are in our domain now." The team froze, their bodies rigid with fear. It was as though the very world around them had come alive, reacting to their presence. The air shimmered once more, and the sky above rippled, as if the fabric of space itself was unfolding before them. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. Who are you?" she asked, though her voice quivered in uncertainty. She didn't know if the voice would answer, or if it was merely toying with them. "We are the architects," the voice replied, the word dripping with an ancient authority. "We are the creators of realities, the weavers of worlds. You have entered the nexus of all that is, and all that ever will be. You are but one of many. Simulations." The team exchanged stunned glances. Simulations. The word hung in the air like a curse. The idea that their world, everything they knew, was part of a grand experiment was terrifying. But to hear it spoken aloud by the very beings who controlled it was beyond comprehension. "What do you mean, simulations?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "Our world, everything we've built, it's not real." "Real?" The voice echoed with a dark amusement. "What is real to you, little ones? The laws you follow, the paths you carve through your short lives? All of it is but a fleeting shadow in our design. Your universe is a single thread in the tapestry of our creations, a tiny experiment in the grand scheme of things." The weight of those words struck Evelyn like a physical blow. They weren't just observing multiple universes, they were creating them, molding them. She could barely breathe as the implications of what the voice was saying began to sink in. The multiverse wasn't just a place for exploration. It was a playground, and they were its unwitting test subjects. "Why?" Lara finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Why do you do this? What's the purpose of all of this?" The voice paused as if considering the question. "Purpose? You are too small to understand, but your existence serves a purpose. Nonetheless, we test the limits of creation, the flexibility of reality, the fragility of life. We see what happens when you are pushed to the brink of destruction and beyond. We study what choices you make, what paths you follow, It is an experiment, a game, if you will. An experiment? Evelyn repeated, her voice barely audible. You're using entire worlds, entire civilizations as pawns in your game? Pawns? The voice chuckled, a sound that echoed like the wind through empty corridors. No, we are the gods of this multiverse, and you are our creations. We shape your fate, guide your actions, and watch as you struggle for meaning in a world that we control. You are not the first to come here, nor will you be the last. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to grasp the enormity of what she had just learned. Their entire existence, their lives, their work, their memories had been crafted by these beings. They were mere puppets in a vast, unfathomable game. And this was only the beginning. If they were to survive, they needed to understand the rules of the game and how to break free from it. But before Evelyn could speak, the sky above them suddenly darkened and the air grew cold. A massive shadow descended, blotting out the light, and the team found themselves surrounded by figures, shadowy humanoid beings that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. "You should not have come," the voice intoned, now filled with a new, ominous warning. "You are not ready to learn the truth, but it is too late now." As the shadows closed in, Evelyn realized that the true nature of their discovery had just begun to unfold. The gods of the multiverse were not just watching them, they were ready to see how far they would go before breaking. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Harper was truly afraid. The shadows that surrounded them seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting and distorting in ways that defied explanation. Evelyn's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The disembodied voice, which had once been nothing more than a distant presence in their minds, now felt as though it was a physical entity pushing in from all sides. The air was thick with tension, and the very fabric of reality around them seemed to be bending, as though the world itself was aware of their trespass. Marcus was the first to react, stepping forward with an expression of determination that belied his fear. "We didn't ask for this," he called out, his voice ringing with authority. "We came here by accident. We only wanted to understand the multiverse. Let us go, and we won't interfere anymore." The shadows surrounding them stirred, but the voice, the architect as it had called itself, spoke again, and this time it was filled with a chilling calmness. "You are not in a position to bargain, little ones," the voice said. "You have already crossed the threshold. You are already part of the experiment. There is no going back now." A cold silence descended over the group as the words settled in. The weight of the realization hung heavily in the air. They were no longer scientists, pioneers of the unknown. They were no longer explorers or adventurers on the cusp of discovery. They were simply pawns, insignificant pieces in a cosmic game played by entities who wielded power beyond anything they could comprehend. Evelyn's mind spun, struggling to grasp the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. The gods of the multiverse, these architects, were not simply observing different realities, they were manipulating them, bending entire civilizations to their will. The worlds they had seen so far, the ones they had assumed were alternate versions of Earth, were nothing more than simulations, experiments in an unfathomable game of power and control. As the shadows grew more pronounced, twisting and coiling around them, the team huddled closer together, instinctively seeking some form of comfort in each other. But there was no safety here. There was no refuge from the cosmic entities who played with the very essence of existence. "Why us?" Lara's voice cracked as she spoke, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Why bring us here? Why did you let us open the portal?" The architects seemed to pause, as though considering her question. For a brief moment the shadows hesitated, and the air grew still. Then the voice answered, its tone suddenly colder, more distant. "You were never meant to find us," the architect said. "But you are here now, and your arrival is not without meaning. You are the ones who have breached the boundary. You are the ones who have discovered the truth. You have seen behind the curtain, and now you will play your part." Evelyn's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information they had been given. It was becoming clear that the architects were not like gods in any mythological sense. They were far more dangerous. They were creators, manipulators, designers of realities. To them, life was not sacred. It was a tool, a medium to test theories, to push the boundaries of existence itself. "You ask why you were brought here," the voice continued, "but the answer is simple. You are a variable, an anomaly. Your presence in our domain is not an accident, but a result of the decisions you made. You have opened the portal, and now you must face the consequences of that choice." A chill ran through Evelyn as the words struck home. Their curiosity, their ambition to explore the multiverse, had led them to this moment. They hadn't just discovered parallel universes. They had broken open a rift, one that the architects had allowed to remain sealed for eons. Now they were here, and there was no going back. "Consequences," Marcus repeated, his voice tinged with panic. "You mean this is punishment?" "Punishment?" The voice almost laughed, a sound like the echo of thunder. "No, this is not punishment. This is a test. You are part of a greater experiment, one that has been in the making for millennia. You are the chosen subjects, the next phase in our work. How you react to the choices we give you will determine whether or not you survive." Evelyn's mind was reeling. The revelation that their entire existence was a part of an experiment, a cosmic plaything for these gods, was almost too much to bear. But there was something deeper in the architect's words that unsettled her even more. How you react will determine whether you survive. The architects weren't just controlling their reality, they were shaping their fate, determining whether they lived or died based on their actions. A new thought entered Evelyn's mind, one that made her stomach twist with dread. What if they weren't the first? What happened to the others? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The other worlds, the other civilizations you've created, what happens to them when their experiment is finished? The shadows around them seemed to pulse in response, the air growing even colder. For a moment there was no answer, only the feeling that they were being watched, studied. And then the voice spoke again, its tone more sinister than before. "Some of them evolve," the architect replied, its voice thick with malice. "Some of them reach the limits of their potential, surpassing their creator's expectations. Others fail. And when they fail, we reset them. We wipe them clean, and they begin again." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Reset. The very idea sent a cold shiver down her spine. Did that mean their world, her world, was just a simulation, one that could be wiped away and started over at any time? Were they just part of an endless cycle with no hope of escape? "Are you saying we're all just doomed?" Lara asked, her voice breaking. "That there's no way out?" The shadows seemed to shift again, this time in a way that made the very ground beneath them tremble. "Doomed?" the architect repeated, its voice dripping with an unsettling calmness. "You have already been given a choice. The game has already begun. It is not our fault that you are in the position you are in. You are the ones who chose to open the portal. You are the ones who chose to break the barrier between our worlds. You have played your part in our design. Now you must face the consequences of your actions." The words echoed in Evelyn's mind, each one heavy with meaning. It was clear now. They weren't just caught in an experiment. They were the experiment. The architects had allowed them to open the portal, not because they wanted to grant humanity access to the multiverse, but because they had orchestrated it from the start. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking with the weight of the question. "Now," the voice said, its tone dark and final, "you will begin your test. You will face the choices we have set before you, and you will see how far you are willing to go. You will either succeed or you will be reset. The outcome is not ours to choose. It is yours." The shadows began to shift again, this time swirling around them in a violent, disorienting whirl. The world around them seemed to fold in on itself like a collapsing star, pulling everything into the blackness. In the final moments before the darkness swallowed them whole, Evelyn realized the true nature of their situation. They were no longer in control of their fate. They had been cast into a game they could not understand, and their survival, if it was even possible, would depend on how well they played by the architect's rules. But there was one thing Evelyn knew for sure. She wasn't going to just accept the game. She wasn't going to allow herself and her team to be pawns in their cosmic game. She would find a way out, no matter the cost. The darkness that swallowed them wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of everything they had known to be real. As the blackness enveloped them, it felt like time itself had stopped. There was no up or down, no sense of direction. Everything around them was simply gone. But then, just as quickly as it had consumed them, the darkness began to fade. Evelyn blinked and looked around. They were no longer in the ruins of the strange world they had discovered. Instead, they stood in the middle of a pristine, white room, bare, sterile, and utterly devoid of life. The floor beneath their feet was smooth and cold, and the walls stretched upward, disappearing into an endless void above. It felt like being inside an observation chamber, as though they were trapped in a simulation within a simulation. The team exchanged confused glances, their breaths shallow and uneven. They had barely recovered from the horror of the architect's words when everything had gone dark. Now they were here, in what could only be described as a completely artificial space. "This is..." "What?" Marcus whispered, his voice taut with disbelief. "Where are we now?" Before Evelyn could respond, a low hum filled the air. A subtle vibration pulsed through the room, sending ripples of energy through their bodies. The sensation was disorienting, like being in the eye of a storm, suspended between chaos and calm. The walls, which had seemed so featureless moments before, began to shift, the edges becoming fluid, as though they were made of liquid rather than solid matter. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the room, and the figure of a tall, dark-clad figure appeared in front of them. The figure was humanoid, but its face was obscured by a mask, smooth, featureless, and cold. The person, or entity, did not speak, but instead gestured toward one of the walls. A door, an archway, of pure white light, materialized, its presence almost as shocking as the sudden appearance of the figure. It beckoned them, offering a way out, but Evelyn felt no sense of relief. This was no ordinary door. She could feel its weight, its gravity, pulling at her very soul. "Are we supposed to go through that?" Lara asked, her voice trembling. "Only one way to find out," Evelyn muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the figure before them. "If we don't take a chance, we'll never know what comes next." With a hesitant nod, she began walking toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the very air around them was pushing back. The rest of the team followed, and together they entered the light. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world around them shifted once more, and they found themselves standing in an entirely new environment. This time, it was a city, towering. Skyscrapers of glass and steel stretched toward the sky, their reflective surfaces catching the light of a golden sun that hung low in the horizon. The air smelled of fresh rain, a stark contrast to the sterile, lifeless atmosphere they had just left. The people around them, if they could even be called people, moved through the streets with robotic precision, their expressions vacant, their bodies stiff. There was no laughter, no conversation. It was as though the entire population was in a trance, going through the motions of life without actually living. Marcus glanced around, his eyes wide. This doesn't feel right. It's like we're in some kind of simulation, Evelyn nodded grimly. That's exactly what it is. This is another world created by the architects. It's not real. None of this is real. But the more Evelyn observed the city, the more unsettling it became. The people, these pale, lifeless figures, were going through their days as though they had no will of their own. They walked in perfect synchronization, as though they were controlled by some unseen force. It was like watching a parade of puppets, their strings pulled by an invisible hand. "What are they?" Lara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They look human, but they're not alive." "Controlled," Evelyn said, her gaze narrowing. "They're nothing more than simulations, just like the world we came from." But as the words left her mouth, something caught her eye. In the distance, a figure broke away from the crowd, moving against the flow of people. Unlike the others, this person seemed alive. Their movements were fluid, purposeful. Their face was full of emotion, their eyes bright with something resembling awareness. "Look," Evelyn said, pointing. "That person, there's something different about them." Without thinking, they began walking toward the individual, drawn by a sense of curiosity and unease. The closer they got, the clearer it became that this person wasn't like the others. They were aware. They were alive. The figure paused when it noticed them, turning to face them with an expression of confusion and fear. "Who are you?" the person asked, their voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" We don't know," Marcus replied, glancing back at Evelyn. "We were just..." The figure's expression hardened. "You don't belong here. You're not supposed to be in this world. You've made a mistake. You have to leave." Before they could ask more questions, the person turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd of lifeless citizens. "Wait," Evelyn shouted, but the figure was already gone. "What do you mean, leave?" There was no answer. The crowd continued to move around them, indifferent to their presence. Evelyn felt a growing sense of dread as she realized what was happening. They had crossed into another simulation, yes, but this one was different. This one seemed aware of them, aware of the fact that they didn't belong. The warning from the mysterious figure was clear. They had made a mistake. And yet, there was something else in those words, something that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. They have to leave. But leave where? Was there a way out of this endless cycle of simulations? And if so, what awaited them on the other side? As they wandered further into the city, trying to make sense of the strange world, Evelyn's thoughts began to spiral. The architects had made it clear that they were part of an experiment where their choices, their actions, would determine whether they survived. But what did that really mean? Were they simply running through a maze of illusions, always being tested, always being observed? Was their rebellion, their desire to break free, just another variable in the architect's grand design? "Do you think we're being watched?" Lara asked, her voice breaking the silence. "What if we're being manipulated even now?" "Of course, we're being watched," Evelyn replied grimly. "We always have been," but as she spoke, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. What if their every move, their every decision had already been decided? What if the architects had foreseen this, foreseen their rebellion, and had already accounted for it in their experiment? "Everything we do," Evelyn said softly, "everything we've done so far has been part of their game. They control the rules, and no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try to escape, they'll always be one step ahead." For a moment, the weight of those words pressed down on her like an invisible force. Were they truly free to make their own choices, or had they been doomed from the beginning, trapped in a loop of predetermined fate? Were they simply reacting to the architect's design, playing the parts they had been assigned? As they continued their journey through the city, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that their rebellion was nothing more than a form of entertainment, a show for the gods, and she feared that no matter how hard they fought, they would never escape the trap that had been set for them long ago. The city was starting to feel more like a prison. Despite the glittering skyscrapers, the perfect streets, and the facade of order, there was an overwhelming sense of decay at its core, a deep rot that Evelyn couldn't quite place. The people, or whatever they were, walked in flawless harmony, their expressions frozen in mechanical serenity. Every movement was like a carefully rehearsed dance, devoid of genuine emotion. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she realized how close to a nightmare they had come. And then there was the figure, the person who had broken free from the crowd, aware of the truth. That fleeting moment of contact, that brief exchange, had sparked something inside Evelyn. The warning was clear. You're not supposed to be here, but why? What made them different from the people of this world? The question gnawed at her, the unsettling sensation that there was more beneath the surface. More than they could see. They walked through the streets in silence for what felt like hours. Their footsteps echoed in the void, yet the city felt strangely lifeless, as if it were a backdrop for something larger, a game they could never truly control. The buildings towering over them appeared to shift subtly as they passed, warping in ways that defied logic. The air was thick, the atmosphere dense with tension, and Evelyn felt a strange weight on her chest. Each corner they turned, each step they took, felt like they were pushing through a veil of glass that might shatter at any moment. "I think I see something," Marcus suddenly whispered, his voice barely audible. Evelyn snapped out of her thoughts and turned to follow his gaze. Ahead, standing at the edge of a massive plaza, was a door, ordinary by its appearance but radiating a strange aura. The door wasn't like the glowing threshold they had passed through earlier. It wasn't an illusion or a trap. It felt real, solid. It beckoned them, its dark wood contrasting sharply against the sterile white surroundings of the city. "That's the same kind of door we saw back in the other world," Lara said, her voice taut with apprehension. "Do you think it will take us somewhere else? Another test?" "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her eyes narrowing. "But if there's a chance we can learn more, find something that can help us escape, it's our only option." With a single shared glance, they all nodded in unison. There was no choice but to move forward. They approached the door, its edges glowing faintly as they got closer, as though it were aware of their presence. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle, her mind racing. What were they walking into? The fear of what lay on the other side lingered, but the desire for answers was even stronger. If there was any hope of unraveling the architect's hold on their reality, they needed to keep pushing forward. The moment Evelyn touched the door, a surge of energy shot through her hand, and the door swung open with a smooth mechanical motion. Behind it was a vast chamber, empty except for a single figure seated at a large table in the center of the room. The figure was tall, humanoid, but its form was distorted, its body made up of shifting shadows, flickering like an image on an unstable screen. The figure looked up, its eyes glowing faintly. For a moment, Evelyn wasn't sure if it was a being of flesh or something more intangible, but its presence was undeniable. There was power here, an overwhelming sense of ancient authority that left Evelyn breathless. "You've come," the figure said, its voice resonating in their minds, the words sent out like ripples in water. It wasn't speaking in a traditional sense. It was communicating directly into their consciousness, bypassing the need for vocalization. "We've come for answers," Evelyn responded, her voice steady despite the rising tide of panic inside her. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure's shadowed form shifted, and it leaned forward, its voice colder now, laced with a sharp, icy edge. "You seek answers to a question you are not ready to understand. You think you control your destiny. You think you are free to choose, but you are only part of a design that stretches far beyond your comprehension." "Design?" Lara repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "We are nothing more than pawns to you, aren't we? Part of some twisted experiment. You control everything." The figure didn't respond immediately. Its eyes flared with a bright, almost blinding intensity, and the room seemed to shrink around them, the walls warping and flickering like the static of an old television. "You mistake me for a creator," the figure finally said, its voice growing sharper. "I am no god. I am simply the keeper of this trial, the overseer of your choices." A sense of dread washed over Evelyn. A trial. It was as though the world was closing in on them, as though they were no longer individuals, but mere participants in an endless cycle of suffering. They were being tested, pushed to their limits, and every time they thought they had reached the edge of their world, they were forced into another layer of the game. "What is this trial?" Evelyn asked, her voice now more insistent. "Why are you doing this to us? What do you want from us?" The figure paused, its shadowy form flickering again. It regarded them with a strange, detached amusement before answering. "The trial is not for me," it said. "It is for you." It stood then slowly, its movements deliberate and fluid. As it did, the chamber began to change again. The walls dissolved into fog, and the ground beneath their feet shifted, turning into an endless, swirling abyss. Evelyn's stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. They were no longer in a room. They were in a space that seemed to stretch infinitely, as though the very fabric of reality was being unraveled around them. "You are in a world of your own making," the figure continued, its voice reverberating around them. "You were told you could choose. You were told that your fate was yours to decide, but every choice you make is but a single thread in a web already spun. You will not escape." "No," Evelyn whispered, a sudden realization dawning on her. The architect's words echoed in her mind. "You are not in control." It wasn't just the world that was manipulated, it was their choices too. They had believed they could break free, but every decision they made, every step they took, had already been accounted for. They were just playing out a role in a script written long ago. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and it spoke again, its voice growing more forceful. "But there is one thing you can control, one final choice." Evelyn's heart raced. "What choice?" The figure raised a hand, and the space around them warped once more, presenting them with a vision. It was an image of their world, Earth, their home, their lives. But there was a subtle difference. In this vision, the Earth was not teeming with life, not full of bustling cities and thriving ecosystems. It was desolate. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the cities were crumbling, consumed by the void. "This is your world," the figure said. "This is what happens when you fail. This is what happens when you refuse to play the game." Evelyn felt her stomach churn. "And if we succeed?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. The figure's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You will be allowed to live. Your world will continue. Your people will thrive, but there is a price. For every victory there is a cost." "What kind of cost?" Lara asked. "You will never be free," the figure said, its voice suddenly cold again. "You will remain trapped in the loop, forever tested, forever judged. You will live out your lives, but you will never escape." The room fell silent, the weight of its words sinking into their bones. The truth was undeniable. No matter what choice they made, they were bound to the will of the architects. Their lives, their world, nothing was truly theirs to control. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The offer was inescapable, survival, but at the cost of their freedom. The loop would continue, and they would remain part of the experiment, forever and ever. But then Evelyn did the one thing she had not done before. She made her own choice. "I refuse," she said, her voice firm. "I refuse to be part of your game, no matter the cost." The figure's eyes flickered with something akin to amusement, or perhaps frustration. It seemed to consider her words for a long moment before responding. "So be it," it said softly. "The trial is not over. It has only just begun." And with that, the world around them shattered once more, leaving Evelyn with only one burning question. Was she truly ready to pay the price of defying the architects? The sensation of falling was not new to Evelyn, but it had never felt like this before. This time, there was no floor to catch her, no edge to stop her descent. The infinite void around her felt cold and unforgiving, as though every fragment of reality was being sucked into a singularity. She could hear nothing, no wind, no sound, not even her own heartbeat. It was as though the universe itself had forgotten to make noise. For a brief moment, everything seemed to still, and then, with a violent jolt, she landed on solid ground. She gasped, her lungs heaving, and blinked rapidly as her surroundings came into focus. She was standing in a familiar place, her laboratory, the sterile white walls, the humming machines, the flickering monitors, and the smell of chemicals in the air. It was the place where it had all started. But something was wrong. The walls were cracking, as though they were under immense strain, and the lights overhead buzzed and flickered erratically. The once bustling laboratory now felt abandoned, as though time itself had deserted it. "Evelyn," Lara's voice echoed from behind her. Evelyn spun around, her heart racing. Lara was standing there, her expression frozen in disbelief. She was wearing the same lab coat, the same clothes, but her eyes were wide with something else, fear. "What's happening?" Lara whispered, taking a step forward. "What is this place?" "This is where it began," Evelyn said, her voice shaky but determined. She reached out a hand, touching the cracked surface of the wall. The fracture beneath her fingers felt real, too real. She wasn't sure if it was her mind playing tricks on her, or if something far more sinister was at work. But there was a palpable sense of dread building within her. "We're still inside the simulation," Marcus said from behind them, his voice laced with confusion. "But this doesn't make sense. Why are we here? What's happening?" Evelyn didn't answer at first. She turned around, pacing slowly through the room as her mind raced. It didn't feel like a simulation. This place, this space felt tangible. The walls, the machines, even the air. It was all too familiar. But if they were inside another layer of the architect's game, why were they being presented with something so intimate, something so personal? "There's something wrong," she muttered. "This isn't how it's supposed to work." The architect said we could choose. If we made the right choice, we could continue. But this is different. It's like the fabric of reality itself is starting to break down. She could feel it now. There was a pulse beneath the surface of everything, an irregular beat that sent tremors through her. The cracks in the walls deepened. The monitors that lined the room flickered like broken windows, displaying strange, static-laced images that made no sense. Symbols, numbers, faces, glimpses of other realities. But there was something more sinister behind them, a faint suggestion of something watching them, watching her. "What are we supposed to do?" Lara asked, her voice trembling. "How do we stop this?" Evelyn didn't know the answer. She had been so sure before, so convinced that they could escape, that they could outwit the architects, defy their twisted rules. But now, standing in the remnants of her old life, in a place where reality itself seemed to be splintering apart, she wasn't sure of anything anymore. "This is the end," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The end of everything." The words felt like a weight in the air, a burden she couldn't shake. It was true, wasn't it? No matter what choice they made, they were trapped. The architects had been watching them, manipulating them every step of the way, leading them down this path with the promise of escape. But what if there was no escape? What if the end, this end, was simply inevitable? Suddenly, the monitors blinked to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. The static cleared, and a face appeared on the screens. It was a face Evelyn had seen before, her own face, but not quite. This version of herself was distorted, eyes darkened, lips pulled back into a smile that was anything but reassuring. "You should have listened," the distorted version of Evelyn said, its voice hollow and cold. "The game is not over. It will never be over. The choices you make are nothing but illusions." Evelyn froze. The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of her. "No," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "This isn't real. This isn't me." "Oh, but it is," the figure on the screen said. "You've seen it before. You've known all along. Every reality you've entered, every world you've explored has been a reflection of your mind, a testing ground for your very soul, for your very—" "Stop it!" Evelyn shouted, her voice breaking. She stepped forward, but the figure's eyes locked onto her with an unsettling intensity. "Every time you think you've escaped, every time you rebel, the game resets," the figure continued. "The architects, those so-called gods, they've seen this before. They've seen you before. This isn't the first time you've come to this point." Evelyn's heart sank. "What do you mean? What do you mean this isn't the first time?" The distorted version of herself smiled. "You don't remember, do you? You've made this choice before, again and again. Each time you fail, each time you make the same mistake. The architects have been running this experiment for eons, and you are always part of it." "No!" Evelyn shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't understand. It didn't make sense. She couldn't have been part of this before, could she? The figure's eyes darkened, and its voice dropped to a whisper. "This is your reality, your prison, your fate. No matter how many times you break free, you will always return to the beginning." Evelyn stumbled back, her mind reeling. How could this be true? She had rebelled before, hadn't she? She had fought against the gods, against the architects. She had chosen freedom. But if this was the truth, if this was all just another cycle, a never-ending loop, what hope did they have? "You're lying," she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. I won't believe this." The figure on the screen laughed, a hollow, empty sound. "You have no choice. There is no escape. You will live, and you will die over and over again until the end of time. The architects are watching. They've already decided your fate." Evelyn turned to look at Marcus and Lara, but their faces were as pale as hers. The weight of the realization hit them all at once. There was no freedom. There was no way out. They had been trapped in this cycle, this experiment, and it wasn't over. It had never been over. "I won't let this be the end," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but determined. "I will break this cycle. I will find a way out." The distorted version of herself simply smiled. "You always say that, but remember, there's always a price." As the screen flickered, Evelyn's world began to fracture once again, the walls collapsing around her, and the room dissolving into darkness. The darkness was suffocating. Evelyn's mind felt heavy, as though every thought was being submerged beneath an ocean of nothingness. She could hear the distant hum of machines, the faint whir of things that shouldn't be there. The world around her was collapsing into oblivion. Reality was unraveling, slipping like sand through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her limbs felt numb, her vision blurred. but there was a flicker of light, something that fought against the consuming blackness. A distant, familiar presence. "Evelyn!" The voice was soft at first, but then louder, more insistent. Her name, echoing like a memory that she couldn't quite grasp. She blinked, trying to focus on it, on her. Lara was kneeling beside her, shaking her gently. "Wake up. We need to get up. We need to move." For a moment, Evelyn wasn't sure where she was. Her surroundings shifted again. One instant she was floating in a void. The next, she was in the crumbling laboratory once more. She could hear the distant laughter of the distorted version of herself still echoing in the back of her mind, but she forced it down. They weren't stuck in a loop. Not anymore. But how could that be true? The fear clawed at her chest. The architects had the power to reset everything, to erase them, to tear apart the fabric of existence. If everything reset, would they even remember? Would they retain their memories? Or would it be as if it never happened, as though they were doomed to repeat the same trials, the same choices forever? "We can still fight," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We have to stop the reset before it's too late." Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of everything crashing down on her. "We can still fight. But how? How could they stand against the gods themselves, against the beings who controlled the multiverse, who shaped reality like clay?" "I don't know how to stop it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We stop it by choosing," Lara said, her hands gripping Evelyn's tightly. "We have to make a choice. We break the cycle by deciding to stop it. We fight until we can't fight anymore." Evelyn opened her eyes, meeting Lara's gaze. The determination in her friend's eyes was a spark in the darkness. "We choose." It was terrifying, this realization. Everything they had been through, all the endless worlds they had traversed, had led them to this one single point. The architects had given them the illusion of choice, but it was all a trap. But what if the illusion was all they needed? What if, even now, they had the power to make a decision that would break the cycle? "We can't let them win," Evelyn said, her voice hardening. She stood, the strength in her legs surprising her, and then turned to Marcus and Lara. "This, whatever this is, this reset, we have to stop it now." They nodded in unison. There was no hesitation anymore, no doubt. Behind them, the air began to crackle, the very space around them trembling. The final moments of the architect's game were drawing near, and the ground was shifting beneath their feet. There was a sensation of finality in the air, the collapse of everything they knew. Evelyn could see it now. The flickering images of every version of herself, of Marcus and Lara, of every choice they had made, every moment they had lived, flashing before her eyes. Each one was a thread in the grand design, but now there was a fracture in the weave, a break. They could see it. The reset, the collapse of every reality, wasn't just inevitable. It could be stopped. The light grew brighter, and the hum of the universe became deafening. Evelyn closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling the weight of everything. The gods, the architects, had tried to take everything from them. They had tried to make them mere players in their twisted experiment. But the more she fought, the more she realized something. The architects had underestimated the one thing they couldn't control: the human will. "You don't control us," Evelyn said, her voice rising as the world around her began to shudder. "We're not your lab rats." With every word, the ground beneath her feet cracked, fissures of light breaking through the collapsing reality. The others stood beside her, their voices joining hers, their will becoming one with hers. Together, they were more than mere players. They were the architects of their own fate. A piercing sound filled the air, like the tearing of fabric, the rending of the very cosmos. The lights flickered violently, the world around them warping as though it were made of glass being shattered by an invisible hand. Evelyn braced herself, her heart pounding. The final test was here, and then with one last collective thought, the world collapsed. For a brief instant, everything was silent, empty, the sensation of time stretching and breaking, a nothingness so vast it couldn't be comprehended. And then Evelyn breathed. She could feel the air around her, the gentle pull of gravity, the weight of her body. But something was different. She opened her eyes and the world was quiet. No crackling energy, no warping of reality, no gods watching over them. The sky stretched above them, wide and clear. The city, her city, was just as it had been before. Alive, real. Evelyn turned to Marcus and Lara, but they were different. In two, no longer shadows of themselves in a world of endless trials, but real flesh and blood beings. They were free. What happened? Lara asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide. Evelyn smiled faintly, feeling the weight lift from her chest. We won. We broke the cycle. The final reset hadn't just erased the worlds, it had removed the architect's control. The loop was broken, and they were no longer part of the game, no longer prisoners. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn felt the real weight of her breath, freedom. And yet the question lingered, how long would it last? The world around them was quiet, peaceful. The sun set on the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. But deep in the back of her mind, Evelyn knew something would always be there. The question, the nagging uncertainty. Had they really won, or would the architects be back, watching from the shadows, waiting for the next time they tried to escape? As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Evelyn looked up, unsure of the answer. But for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of their gaze. This was their world now, and they were free for as long as that freedom lasted.